For shame.
iPhone is not here. So this is the last one of these, and then Friday will be the last philosophy one for the summer. And I sent out an email message, and Craig has said he will pay for the Kafka books for however many sign up for it. But that's, those are cheap, and I still haven't got a firm response from him on the Schelling books because they're expensive. On the other hand, it's available through Alkek, the exact edition, the SUNY editions, and then Chase also is able to provide PDF versions. And so even if we don't have, even if we can't get those books or can't get all of them, or what I sent him, I suggested a bunch of different alternatives, like maybe the department buys one of them and not the other one, or maybe the department buys them just for this group, and then anyone else who joins has to use the versions from Alkek. I gave him a whole lot of suggestions, and of course he might come up with his own, but I'll just have to wait. I need to know. I think I'm going to send out the announcement for the philosophy seminar next week sometime. So I kind of need to know what he's going to do by then. So I may pester him more, but anyway, that's kind of up in the air. And then Chase, I don't know where Chase is going to be in the administrative, ranks here with regard to the literature seminar.
Yeah, me neither. I'm going to possibly try to do a lot of reading in the next 2 weeks so I can mainly just focus on actually participating in it more so than the whole reading aspect, which I don't think should really take that long for Kafka is fiction. You can just listen to an audiobook. I think I should be able to at least participate but I don't think I can guarantee that kind of administrative position anymore.
So Travis, do you think you'll be able to pick up some of that?
Yeah, definitely. Anything you need. It seems like we have a time and we have the book. I'm not sure what else I would have to do, but yeah, I'm perfectly fine with, just being a liaison or whatever.
So the two administrative things, one would be broadcasting a invitation to the graduates and undergraduates. And, and if you want, I'm happy to do that just because it's not that difficult. I just send Camry a message to everybody. And now that Craig has agreed to purchase that book, I can say, you can, there'll be no cost for the books. So, with your permission, I'll do that next week at the same time I do that for the philosophy seminar. The other thing is coming up with a reading schedule. And I guess that depends on how many weeks you want to meet, because then that determines how many pages you're going to read. And then I don't have a copy of the book, so.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah, so that may be
I
a little
do.
tricky.
I can make a reading schedule.
Okay, yeah.
Although, I guess we haven't determined when we want to stop or how many weeks, though.
What I'm going to do, and this is not, what you have to do, what I'm going to do is schedule it from the second week of classes through the last week of actual classes prior to final exams. That's kind of my standard, but that's what I'm planning on doing.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Yeah. So what time and day did you guys settle on?
I think Wednesday 5 to 7 at this point, right, Chase?
Yeah, that works with me.
Okay.
It seems like in that poll that people filled out, the most Wednesday was the day that most people said they could do that, and it seems like later than this time on Wednesday would be the best. So Yeah, 5 to 7 works for me, but somebody else has a better idea, then I say we can just go with that.
And then I need to come up with the time for the other one. You know, I've got a lot of data there and I need to figure out what to do about that. Like I said, I may end up with some irreconcilabilities, but okay. Well, next week I'll plan on sending out those messages sometime next week. I'll consider yours, the literature one, settled. Chase, I'm going to assume that you will come up with a reading schedule unless you tell me otherwise. And it would be nice if I could send that out with that invitation message sometime next week. So, okay. Any other business questions?
Oh, well, one thing. Okay, so one thing I was gonna maybe suggest, though, this has probably already been rehashed, but since you already sent the email to Dr. Hanks, but it seems like one possible solution would just be buying the first book at first for the first showing, and then waiting to see, you know, who's still engaging in the seminar, and then to buy the second book, maybe at least like kick it down the road,
Mm-hmm.
and then just put a bunch of pressure on them towards that time to buy the second book.
I will send him a message and mention that, because I sent him one message that had a bunch of details, and then I found that on Outkick and sent him another message. So I'll send him another one and raise that or bring that suggestion up as well. Yeah, because then we could avoid maybe buying. I think you're trying to avoid buying a bunch of, like with that Merleau-Ponty book, buying a bunch and then having them sit there. So
yeah.
The only other thing is when you do send the email, if maybe you could just let me know, or if you have the Discord invite, I was just thinking of maybe including that in there, so you know people could just immediately join and then be a part of it. They don't have to like follow any more emails or anything like that. So I know both Chase and I have the link to it. So
yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, you sent that to me as well. I probably need to figure out some way to do that for mine as well. I don't know. Maybe I should just go to your Discord thing and poke around and look at it. And,
yeah, I mean, there's barely anything in there. We haven't done anything with it, but yeah.
Oh, I meant to post a meme. Let me do that real quick.
Yeah. Populate it. Yeah.
Yeah, the link is in one of the emails I sent out, I think, with the that poll, I think it's with that one. Yeah.
I just got an email today from ITAC, I guess, saying that they're going to require a password or something on Zoom meetings, and they're encouraging people to have Zoom rooms rather than doing it this way, I guess. Anyway, I need to check. I need to go. I just got that today, and so it could be that I may have to, you know, include something like that when I send out that message also. So anyway, lots of little administrative details to figure out. But hey, I'm free for the next couple of weeks, so okay. Anything else? Okay. Well, this last
I was gonna do something else, so I got a little distracted. I did want to ask, so is the plan with the Schelling books to read both this one semester, or is the plan to like spread it out over 2 semesters?
The plan was to read both this semester because the actual Schelling text of each one is pretty short.
Okay.
So I don't know how many pages. Well, I could look. You know, we could look at the published site, but I think a bunch of those pages on the SUNY editions are you know, commentary and introduction, stuff like that. So the actual Schelling texts themselves are pretty short. So that's why you know, Chase and Hunter and Travis and Joey, when they were looking, I guess it was you guys were looking for text, that's what they suggested. And I also mentioned to Craig, when I sent him that message, I said there are these SUNY texts that are $33 new each, and then I also sent him a link to the publisher's page and to the Amazon page, and then I also did the same for those other 2 editions, and he agreed with the SUNY, using the SUNY editions, even though they were more expensive, I think because they're newer translations and so on. But yeah, but that's the plan, was to do both this semester. And so Chase was suggesting we start with one, and then depending on who's still around, order the second, but that would all be within this semester.
Yeah, so it's the total text, I think. So the first book, the one on freedom, the actual Schelling text, I believe, is only about 60 something pages. And it has a 30-page introduction that I think we should include in the reading, because
really? Okay.
Yeah, it looks pretty helpful from what I can tell. But even with the introductions included in the readings, it's about 200 pages total. So the other one, The Ages of the World, the second book, that text is about 100 pages. So yeah, I don't think it would be a problem doing 2 of those books. In fact, the problem is going to be maybe that there's actually not going to be a whole lot of reading going on.
Well, if you look at, so you're saying on the second Schelling text, the 100 pages is just the Schelling text?
Yeah.
So you're not recommending the introduction on that one?
So that one, the introduction isn't that long. I think it's maybe like 15 pages or something, but I think I would definitely at least personally read it. I would probably include that in the readings too.
So if I take 315 pages and divide it by 14, maybe it's 13. So if I assume there were 13 meetings, that's still 24 pages a week.
Wait, so that's about 215 or.
Oh, I thought you said that the one book by itself was. I thought that one book was like 200 and the other one was 115, but.
Oh no. So
okay.
Basically, the first book would be 90 pages total, okay. And then the second book would be about 115.
So that's only like 14 pages 15 pages a week.
Yeah.
I would appreciate lighter.
I've not read Schelling, but yeah. And Schelling, I've not read much of him, but he's reportedly pretty difficult, I gather. When I sent that email to Craig, his first remark was, Schelling, wow. Which was a little scary. but yeah, so maybe if we were only reading 14, 15 pages a week, maybe that's not a bad thing. Given the amount, how busy people are and the amount of weirdness this semester and it being Schelling and, so maybe that's okay.
Yeah, he's not an easy read.
Yeah. So, it may be that 15 pages may give us plenty to talk about for a couple of hours. And if not, if we kind of run out of steam, then we can just end early if we need to.
How many pages is the Kafka collection?
It's about 600.
Okay. So that would be normal, but easier to read probably.
Might want to be selective about, because it's a collection of stuff, right? So we might want to pick stuff that we're particularly interested in, or else 600 pages, we could split that over 2 semesters if we really wanted to.
So
or you could just read part of it.
Yeah. So there is one. So it's basically the trial, the castle, and then some of his short stories like the Metamorphosis and in the penal colony. So those 4 are the most important. The other ones, So other than that, there's just one other kind of long thing. It's a letter to his father that's something like 30 pages that it looks kind of interesting.
I would definitely want to read that based on what I know about Kafka's relationship with his father.
Okay, cool. All right, we can read. And so basically, other than those, there's only like some really short stories that I think they're only maybe like 10 pages extra in themselves. So basically, yeah, it's hard to cut out anything substantial. Like basically the only thing I would think about cutting out would be like that letter to his father, but sounds like you guys definitely want to do it. So
that's like
yeah.
46 pages a week, which is a big chunk, but so maybe it'll go easy since it's fiction.
Yeah, let me see. I have the book right here. I can see. Yeah, because right now I don't really plan on cutting anything out from this, but I don't know. I may look at it, and when I'm doing the reading schedule, determine that some things could be cut out.
Yeah, I mean, I trust you, Chase, but I personally I would also be fine with reading the whole thing this semester, but I don't have that much going on personally, so.
Okay, yeah, this letter to my father is almost 50 pages. So, yeah, that's the only one that I would consider if we want to shorten that.
Well, we could start planning on reading the whole thing, and then if people just can't do it, then modify it.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that idea.
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking that things will be pretty chaotic because even though I don't have a lot going on at the moment, I mean, I'm, maybe I'm going to be teaching one class basically is looking at right now. And then other than that, but like, I don't know, lots of other things have been going on just given the state of the world. And so I would be worried about committing to reading like even 40 pages of something relatively easy a week, particularly I'm not a very fast reader. I guess what I would say about it. But we can start off high. I'm cool with that. Just start off with like trying to read the whole thing, and then if that doesn't work out, then we can either start talking about cutting things, or what I would prefer is just that we spread it out over 2 semesters because I really like Kafka and I think we'll get a lot out of him even if we read him a little bit more slowly. But I'm cool with kind of leaving that to the future.
How about maybe not over 2 semesters, but extended a little bit over, well, say if we start the first week of classes, and other than having a week off each for Thanksgiving and for Christmas, I guess, we could go a little bit into January and do a few weeks in January before the spring semester. That'd be one way to at least get, I think we'd get something like another 2 or 3 weeks maybe out of that.
Or I'd be okay even if you pushed some of it into December past, and also January. I don't know how other people feel about that.
I think that given the chaos of the world, just be very flexible. Don't try to manage this with chase any degree of certainty. I'm sure different things you've read and we've all read about the contingency of the world is even more apparent now in 2020. So I would just say, please don't overthink it. Start, but just be open to the idea that we don't know the answer to everything that we're going to do in the Kafka seminar, and be content with that and watch it unfold.
Yeah, I like that spirit. I think it goes well with Kafka, actually.
One reason I usually start the second week is because if I send out a message next week it takes a while for people to respond, and then you have to order books, and that takes, you know, like a week, which actually on the shelling may not be as big a deal since we've got PDF versions and Alkek versions, but the Kafka, it might be a issue. You know, I mean, since it's a more common book, maybe more common in the sense it's fiction and it's more likely to have more copies laying around than someone like Schelling. Maybe it'll be pretty easy to get them quickly, but that's just another, you know, administrative concern is how quickly, once you find out who wants to join, how quickly can you actually get the books in people's hands?
Yeah, so I have a question. Does the department usually buy from the publisher directly? Because I know that evil Amazon, they have it's something like $5, the book I got, and I think it still has like that like 1-day shipping or something like that. So I don't know if they would buy it in that manner or not, though. So
they, you know, I think they have bought it, like one time they got it from Barnes and Noble, and I don't know if they buy from Amazon or not, but I think part of the problem is they have these official vendors that they can purchase stuff from. If they purchase it with university funds, they have to limit themselves to a certain number of vendors. And I don't know if Amazon is on that list or not. I mean, I sent them links for all these books to, and I copied Camry on all this stuff since she's the office manager and is actually the one that has to actually do this stuff. I sent them links to Amazon as well as to the publisher's web page, but I don't know where they'll, you know, I let them know what those costs are, but then Camry has to order them from wherever she can officially order them from. And not even the publisher's price though for that Kafka is only $6. So Amazon is $5, the publisher's $6, you know, so Craig's okay either way.
excellent. Yeah. For Amazon, for the first Schelling book, I think it's something like $26 or $27.
Yeah.
But then I looked at the publisher and it was, you know, 33 or something. So,
Right.
And that's a pretty significant price gap there, especially if you're going to buy, you know, 6 or 7 or whatever.
Yeah, and I, you know, in the first message I sent to Craig, I laid that all out. I put those links in and I said, you know, this is how much it costs and here's the price range depending on which editions you get. And so I blasted him with a lot of detailed information about what different options would cost. So, but like I said, they have to buy it from wherever they have to buy it. So, we can't, I mean, I don't know any way around that problem.
Yeah, this is one concern I kind of had actually about doing Schelling is I knew it was going to be complicated, but he doesn't have some kind of like a clear magnum opus that you can do and just that would be a single book, you know. There's always going to be some kind of complicated combination of books, but oh well. We're already too far into it to go back.
Well, I was sort of pleased that Craig was. I mean, he seemed pleased by the choice. He didn't give me any answer just because of the cost, but he seemed to appreciate that we were willing to bite off something like this. So, I mean, I'm wondering what he's thinking. You look at the list of the last several books, and they're all head splitters except for maybe this summer.
I think I feel like it's difficult to kind of peg down what Craig's views are exactly, but the little bit that I know makes me think that he would specifically probably like someone like Schelling. So that might be part of what's going on there, or it might just be that he likes that we're picking difficult works.
Yeah, maybe he has a predisposition for that. But he's very, very supportive of this whole effort, and he just thinks it's fabulous that people are reading books without any reward other than just reading the books. As Nietzsche said, we're all masochists.
I was trying to explain to my friend these seminars, and he basically couldn't understand the concept that it wasn't for credit or something. I was like, no, we just do this to like read philosophy and talk about it. He's like, oh yeah, but you get like credit though, right? Like, no, I don't.
Did he scream nerd at you at some point?
Say what?
Did he scream nerd at you?
Nerd! Probably.
Reading for its own reward.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically his own kind of nerd, so I don't think he has any room to talk.
You know, maybe
I'm just a philosophy nerd, so yeah.
Reading philosophy is for fun is maybe a bit like you know, people who cut themselves. You know, it seems they're kind of like making little scars on their. We're making scars on our minds.
A little masochistic. I'm willing to grant that. I of course have like deeply utilitarianly calculated that reading each of these books improves the world very slightly. So that's why I'm.
Of course. Okay. So are we ready to jump into Borges?
See.
These last parables, as the editor calls them, just a second, are seem to be kind of melancholy, and you know, it's interesting. And all along, I noticed the editor. I think the editor put in a fair amount of work in trying to select stories that were next to each other because they would have similar things and stuff. And it seemed to me that one of the common themes through at least most of these last pages is feeling of loss. So like on the first one,
thank you.
He's at the end of the first one, he says, upon waking, he felt that he had received and lost an infinite thing. On the second one, Paradiso, the first paragraph at the end, something infinite had been lost. And then, you know, Ragnarok, the sense of losing the old gods and so on. So it just seems there's this feeling of, you know, like the Witness, you lose these memories and they're gone forever.
Perishability.
Yeah, perishability and loss. So anyway, I'll just make that comment at the beginning. And
yeah, I definitely got that vibe from it, to the point where rereading this stuff put me in somewhat of a melancholy mood this morning, but feels good, you know. We can talk about and be masochistic sufferers of melancholy parables together, but I think some sad boys, yeah. So I think that Borges' biography can somewhat illuminate kind of some of the stuff in I believe that these parables were mainly from later in his life when he was blind, and that's why they're so short. And so I think he had to get people to, you know, transcribe this stuff for him. And so he did have, I'm not totally sure about his biography. Maybe Ed knows more than I do, but I believe he had like fallen in love with like multiple women that had died. And that's kind of what the Zahir is about. So I think his love life was pretty shitty from what it sounds like, and it was basically like a bunch of like rejection and people dying. So I think that kind of informed his life experience, which kind of informed his these works here. But obviously it's much more than just his individual life, in the sense that he's talking about, I think he's almost seeing like refractions of these of perishability and everything, like in memory and the gods and all these things. And yeah, I think especially the thing about the gods is interesting, because in one way you can kind of read it as something almost like a Nietzschean kind of thing. But so the name of it, Ragnarok, that's from Norse mythology, and it's actually been translated as literally meaning like basically the fate of the gods, or the twilight of the gods. It was also something of a title in Wagner's Ring Cycle of operas. So I think you can see there's a Nietzsche connection there. But so I've actually been reading Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy, where he's talking about kind of how the Olympian gods kind of came about. And now he's talking here about basically like the death of the Olympian gods. And it's kind of interesting to see that, like, exactly what exactly is coming into existence here, having been lost and then dying again in his dream. I don't know. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on there.
Well, the odd thing about Norse mythology is I haven't read it in a while, but Odin and Thor and the rest are going to be destroyed. And that was literally part of the theology of the Norse religion. It wasn't like, when you look at Judaism and Christianity and Islam, there's a second coming. Or for the Jewish people, it would be the first coming, right? The Messiah would but both in terms of Islam and Christianity, Jesus comes down and says, okay, I'm running things, you idiots. But in the Norse, it's very somber, because it's and I'm just speaking as someone who is outside of that tradition. So for me, the sense of hopelessness is extraordinarily present, because there is, in their cosmology, in their theology, there is going to be an end. The gods are going to be destroyed, and maybe there can be a delay, but there can't be a change in the fates. That is going to be the outcome. And it's interesting to me to have a religion where your gods are going to end up destroyed. Because I would defer to the rest of you, but I don't know of any other religion that you could call an organized religion where, any of these deities would actually be destroyed.
I think that there are some themes along those lines in a lot of Indo-European religions, but the Norse definitely seem to take it the farthest, right? Like there are prophecies of there being like this, basically the same thing that happened to Kronos happening to Zeus, right? One of his kids overthrows him. I think like hypothetically in Hindu theology, right, eventually this specific cycle of the world will come to an end and another one will existence, but like that, the specifics of that I don't think are theologically on much, right? So there's stuff like that, but I think that the Norse are definitely unique in the way that they like, there is this very thorough telling of what the end of the world looks like, including the like definite things about how each of the gods die, right? Who they're fighting when it happens, and this like kind of larger cosmic context that it happens in. So that I think they're unique in that.
I also thought it was interesting for Borges, given his not only national background, being an Argentine, but with some English background, but also his reading when his family went to Switzerland, and they were there for 5 to 6 years, and he read in traditions that were not weren't common then to read into, and later today they're not coming. I mean, how many people actually read medieval Jewish Kabbalistic literature? I mean, it's just that's not, in the top 5 of what people are reading. But if you go back earlier, think of Deutsches Requiem. Was Deutsches Requiem part of this readings that we did, or am I thinking of another collection?
Yeah, we did that.
Okay, and also there's what I find extraordinarily interesting about Borges is he does seem to have captured or to have recognized something real in Teutonic / Nordic sensibility. So you see that in The Witness, you see this in Ragnarok, you see it in Deutsches Requiem, and in other essays he wrote, because you remember how the Argentine government was pro-Axis, even though it never joined on that side. He has an essay on something like the German file, talking to a German file, and all that, and you can see that he has a real sense of it. And I'm just bringing that up. I don't have an explanation for it, because when I've looked at the literature that he looked at, or the description of what he looked at, I don't see the Norse being that prominent in what he read, but somehow to me he has a sense of what those folks were about.
I think it's interesting to point out that, so in The Witness, another one of the parables, he talks about Woden, who's Odin, same thing. And it's also in the context of this god essentially being lost, this idol being lost, with this Saxon who dies. And so it's definitely these gods. So he is kind of singling out these Norse gods to some degree that are connected with this idea of a kind of loss. But then he also kind of throws in some other ones, or at least in his dream image, he's also got some Roman, Egyptian gods, and he says basically the degeneracy of the Olympian lineage. So that's Greek. I think one possible interpretation you could see it as is there's always a kind of debate over modernity and the idea of disenchantment, or basically has modernity essentially destroyed the gods, and that, I think almost everyone would say that explicitly we don't acknowledge them generally. Most people are not going to go around like talking about worshiping Hermes and whatnot. But I think the real question is whether they've kind of snuck in through the back door, and other, say, institutions or whatnot have just kind of taken their role. And I think here he's kind of signaling towards a kind of like a real loss, though, of something, a real kind of disenchantment. But it's interesting that he talks about these gods in his dream as something that have kind of degenerated themselves. And I wonder if that's kind of, if they're sort of representative of these kind of forces of nature that have just kind of atrophied, and they're no longer applicable because the human situation in modernity is also kind of alienated from a lot of these the cruel natural forces that I think are, say, the ancestors living in that came up with the Olympian lineage. They would have been much more connected with, I think, the cruelty of nature and all these things. And according to Nietzsche, at least, that's why they kind of came up with the Olympian lineage to give a kind of human form on these things. But yeah, there's a lot going on here, and I don't know, probably overanalyzing it too much, but I guess that's what dreams are for. So, oh well.
Go ahead.
So I was going to look again at some of the Nietzschean themes in Ragnarok. Some of these words, and I don't know if he intended this way, but these are sort of keywords for Nietzsche. Degeneracy, the beasts of prey. That's something that shows up a lot in Nietzsche. Fear and pity, and killing gods. Those are all Nietzschean themes. And Nietzsche talks about the Greek gods, but he does also refer to the people of this culture. In the genealogy, when he's talking about the beast of prey, he specifically calls out several cultures where he believes the beasts of prey have emerged, and one of them were the Viking cultures, where he talks about the beast of prey. And he actually, you see this in Zarathustra too, but he says that, he's contrasting sort of Christian religious sensibilities to these sort of ancient religious sensibilities. And, in the Christian sensibilities, pity is considered a good thing. But at least in Nietzsche's view, in these ancient religions, pity was a temptation to be avoided. And you see that in Zarathustra explicitly. He says, I was tempted by my pity to take pity on these people. And in genealogy, when he's talking about the the Vikings, he says, he quotes, I don't know what he's quoting from, but sort of a prayer to Wotan, to make my heart stone and purge pity from my heart. And so, you see these kinds of things. And the funny thing, though, is here in this story, or in this, whatever it is, in those that last sentence, in the second to the last paragraph, suddenly we sense that they were playing the last card, that they were cunning, ignorant, and cruel, like old beasts of prey, that if we let ourselves be overcome by fear and pity, they would finally destroy us. And so what that makes me, and then we've joyfully killed the gods at the end. It's almost as though, these ancient gods who do not have pity and who are sort of a manifestation of this, I don't know what, virile, warlike humanity, they come back, and their only weakness is if we do not take pity on them. So if we have pity on the old gods, then then that gives them the right to return. But that's what we do, is we kill them without pity. I mean, that seems to be what he's saying here, because they were cunning. If we let ourselves be overcome by fear and pity, they would finally destroy us. And so rather than being overcome by pity for them, we exert that same kind of warlike attitude toward those old gods and kill them. And which it's kind of it almost seems like it's an inversion of Nietzsche's comments about the will to truth, that you had the will to truth manifested most stridently in Christianity. And then it was that very will to truth that ended up killing Christianity ultimately, because it couldn't stand up to its own examination of its own principles in the light of truth. And here it's like the old gods try to return, and we killed them with the very same passion that they either engendered in humanity or manifested from humanity. So I'm not sure what that means, but it's and then I was just noticing in the previous parable, Paradiso, the second to the last paragraph, perhaps some feature of that crucified countenance lurks in every mirror. Perhaps the face dyed was obliterated so that God could become all of us. And so there's this theme, I wonder, almost of humanity becoming gods. You know, we kill the gods in Ragnarok, perhaps, he doesn't say, but perhaps so that we can become gods, or at least we become more powerful than gods. And in the Paradiso, God becomes all of us. And I don't know what exact, I mean, if that's what he's suggesting, I don't know. I'll just throw that out there as an interesting possibility that maybe there's some transformation, and I don't know that that he would say it's all good even, but that maybe there's some transformation where we have either believe we can, or we have sort of taken on the divine role ourselves.
Nevitt, what you and Chase, when you were talking, reminded me of a much newer novelist, Neil, I believe his last name is pronounced Gaiman. And his I guess driving force, I think his novel is called American Gods, was that the gods received their power from the belief of the people in them. And as less and less people believed in them, they literally declined in their power. And when I think also of that earlier insight of the role of fear in belief, and if somebody fears something, doesn't that suggest that they believe in that thing? And you know, you quoted Nietzsche in Ragnarok saying, if we let fear and pity, and I thought that was interesting combination of two emotions that we usually don't put together, fear and pity. And fear, you know, somebody could argue, people have argued that fear towards a religious entity that can turn into veneration, right? You know, that line from Battle Hymn of the Republic, God's terrible, swift sword. It's the older meaning of the word terrible, not being very, very bad, you know, like, you know, and also think of the word awful. We've drained both of those terms of their original religious meaning. Terrible means awe-inspiring. Awful, A-W-E, full, you know, full of awe. And I think it's interesting that also Borges in these shorter parables has almost is a precursor to Gaiman, in that he has a sense of, well, what is the relationship between the believers and what is and the gods and what they're believed, and if they are not believed anymore, how can they have this power? And there is a relationship there.
Yeah, I think so. One thing, I guess you could kind of interpret that, you know, these gods represent this kind of bestial nature, whether it's, you know, within humanity or nature, or it's kind of the nature of humanity, that it is basically by carrying out kind of the actions that they are representative of the forces for on themselves, that's actually kind of keeping them into, it's kind of continuing their existence paradoxically through killing them. So I can definitely see that that's kind of also going on in these other stories where he's talking about this kind of paradoxical life and death kind of thing, like you know, the idea like the crucified God basically, by being crucified, continues into all of us. And I think it's kind of, you can, you know, combine this idea that, you know, maybe there's no longer some kind of an outside external idol that people place outside of themselves in terms of identification anymore with these forces, and instead it's something basically that we're acting out of from a more unconscious level, in terms of now we just are kind of cruel, instead of, you know, having some kind of God that represents our cruelty towards us so that we can kind of consciously identify with it. I guess I'm giving something like a Jungian interpretation now. Oh well, but I think I agree definitely that. So I think so Nietzsche makes this point that, you know, the idea of a God that's all about love and goodness and pity and these things, and that our relation to that God would also be something like that, that's kind of strange. That's well, for him, that's a sign of degeneracy or whatnot. And the thing that was, for him, life affirming about the Greeks is that the Greek gods had all the same attributes as the humans. There's no kind of moral selectivity within the gods. Everything all the awful things that humans did, the gods did as well. They were not really morally superior in any way. And he saw that as, you know, that's an affirmation of life itself, where morality, being selective about it and saying, you know, everything is bad, everything is awful, that's a kind of rejecting of life. Where, so in terms of this context here, I wonder where exactly Borges is on that scale, because, so I know he was influenced by Schopenhauer, who, you know, takes that life rejecting point of view. I'm not sure exactly where Borges would be on that, but I feel like Schopenhauer is kind of like haunting the melancholy of a lot of these parables, in the sense of, I know one thing, so Schopenhauer, he believed that a source of our melancholy, or basically the suffering of life, is individuality. It's this individual principle that sees things as separate and is in space and time and whatnot. And I wonder if there's something like that also going on, because he does seem to associate, you know, this temporal condition also with this kind of melancholy, with this loss. And it seems to connect also with this idea of like the loss of these gods, but then, yeah, it seems like there could also be the loss of the gods, or basically the continuation of them, but I don't know.
One thing that this made me think about a lot, which I don't think Borges necessarily intended, or I would be very surprised if he intended this, is some of the relationship that modern day pagans that I've met have with issues of like tradition and their relationship with the gods and what that even looks like effectively. And I think he does a very good job of capturing it, even if this wasn't the direction he was going at, because I think a lot of the interpretations y'all are providing make a lot more sense in terms of like his intentions with these stories. But like a big issue in a lot of pagan circles that I've interacted with is this question of like, how do you interact with the like implicit cultural conservatism of trying to do something like worshiping the Norse gods, or right, the Greek gods, or the Egyptian gods for that matter, right? And a lot of I think the common image of like somebody who in the modern day worships like Odin or something is like like maybe a fascist, or at the very least like probably a very conservative person, probably white, I don't know, probably lives in the Midwest, or else lives in like Sweden or something, right? And they probably have like very conservative and like very regressive thoughts about the world. And what's funny is that like that doesn't well characterize the people that I've met. Like I think the first like Norse pagan I met was like a hardcore sort of Trotsky Marxist, and he had a very particular way of how he talked about that and how he thought about those things integrating. But there is this constant issue in the way that people approach these things. I saw it very present in the way that he talked about like kind of the gods kind of losing their comprehension of language, and he talks like kind of associates them with oh God, so short, I can look through it again, can't I? So in the last paragraph, I believe, it's about midway through. Their clothing corresponded not to decorous poverty, but rather to the sinister luxury of the gambling houses and the brothels of the Bajo. Right, like this description of them as being from kind of the sleazy part of town, like having money, but having money in these like very like questionable methods, right? You know, it makes me think a lot about like somebody who's a libertarian who, I don't know, sells stocks and works for a hedge fund and like, I don't know, worships Thor in his spare time, basically. And it's sort of like, this is such a weird perversion of like historical Vikings. If you look at them, like if you're going to try and be a weird historicist, like none of this matches up with anything that culture would have recognized. And then on top of that, like narrowly viewing Norse culture through the lens of like the Vikings or something like that is super reductive. But a lot of these people just kind of take questionable values, I guess I would say, that they receive from their modern culture, like things like monogamy, right, which is something that I see questioned in a lot of like pagan circles. But there are a lot of like more conservative pagans that are like, well, no, you need to have like a traditional monogamous household. The woman stays home and takes care of the kids and something like that. And it's just like, that's not, like if you're a historical reconstructionist, that doesn't look anything like what they would do. But it looks like what somebody wants to imagine that historicity would look like. And so it ends up becoming this sort of weird caricature. So yeah, I just thought about stuff like that a lot, reading Ragnarok, and also reading, because like a huge issue in a lot of pagan communities, in terms of like what the Witness is talking about, if you're going to do something like Norse practice or Slavic practice, or I mean, there's a whole debate about whether this counts for Wicca and how it, right, like I could go on for a very long time describing these things to y'all, but basically the fact that everybody who practiced these religions is dead means if you want to practice them, you're like, how do you do that? What does that look like? And one very concerning aspect of that is, you know, in an attempt to get as close to the way that this was historically practiced, people just do whatever it is that they read in the book that it said that they did, which A, that might be wrong, but B, even if it is right, you don't understand any of the context of why they might have done things in that particular way. Was this an unusual ritual? Is it the thing that they did every Sunday? Is it a thing that they did every Sunday in that village, but in no other village, right? Like without any kind of like contextualization, what you end up reproducing is like kind of a caricature of something. And then in order to like actually try and feel like you really are a part of that caricature, you end up trying to cling to it in a very like rigid way. And that like clinging to something in a very rigid way isn't something that you have to do if you just are sort of natively part of a tradition. Like if you're just Catholic and you encounter new ideas and you were raised Catholic, then you just kind of change your mind about it, and you might stop being Catholic, but you might just keep being Catholic. And now you just have like a unusual form of Catholicism that you practice. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I should shut up at this point.
So I guess, oh wait, somebody else gonna?
Travis,
you can talk.
I was just gonna say, I mean, it's kind of not related, honestly, a whole lot to the Ragnarok specifically. But I find it interesting that you guys kind of see this. I mean, I see obviously this theme of loss and this melancholy of kind of Borges, perhaps, recognizing that he's dying soon, or having some kind of, recognition of his own loss. But I can't help but, and maybe I have this sort of masochistic attraction to sadness, but I see this kind of underlying beauty and kind of message of of gaining, like to lose something is really to have gained something in some sense, to have these things that you can now lose, and that gaining and loss is kind of a necessary aspect of gaining things, and so from Borges and especially these stories, I see him kind of recognizing the fact that all that he has created and all that he has done will have to be lost to him in some sense, and that the beauty of it is the fact that he was able to create, and gain so much that now has to be lost. And I see that especially in Borges and I, which is I think my favorite parable and maybe my favorite story in this whole book, about how kind of creating and presenting yourself in a certain way is in a way losing some aspect of yourself, like the internal void, the nothingness that exists within all of us. By creating something, by pretending to be someone, we're kind of discrediting in that void, but I think at the end of the day, that void is what provided everything to happen. It provided these short stories, it provided this opportunity for creation within him, and so I think that I can't help but feel like Borges, in all these stories is kind of representing the fact that, especially in The Witness and, maybe even in The Gods, kind of him being able to come back now and kill these gods that perhaps he had such respect for when he first learned about them and found them. It's like, to me, it's in a way him kind of recognizing all that he's done, and recognizing the fact that he is even a witness, he has things that only he has, and that he, by losing them, he is recognizing the value of himself. Without dying, without losing all these things, he'd never be able to see what he had, and so for me, I don't know, I can't help but kind of see all this as some kind of really beautiful representation of, like, this is what I did, and to have lost it is the only way to have had it in the first place.
I would be really curious if, like, part of his biography, as far as, like, when he wrote some of these, coincided with his onset of his blindness, because although I share a little bit of that sentiment and the beauty of him writing about his loss, I thought it, at least the tone that I interpreted from it, was a lot more remorseful, at least especially in Borges and I, only because he is unable to discern himself from the man and the machismo behind maybe some of his earlier works, to the point to where he's having like a lot of his self-reflection in Borges and I. And so that was one of those things that that was a really interesting tidbit that Chase kind of brought up, and I'd be curious if this was written post or whenever he went blind, because it's one of those things where he's losing these different parts of his identity, and it's not something that he physically will be able to reclaim. And so he has this, testament to this great, huge, Argentinian writer, but he's not necessarily that person any longer, because he isn't able to experience things in the same way. He has different experiences. He's loved and lost quite a bit at this point in life, and it's more of a, I don't want to say a lamentation, but it's more of a reflection of, I've poured myself into my work, but what do I have left? Who am I at the end of the day? And I think in the way that I interpreted the loss of the face, or the loss of accessibility from the gods, was something that kind of mirrored, at least in my mind, not necessarily a reputation, but kind of the clout that comes with being a successful writer, or the clout that comes with being someone who is recognized, even though, if I remember correctly, he wasn't really necessarily recognized or lauded as highly as other contemporaries in Europe, correct? Like he basically was an unsung hero until after he died.
No, I mean, he did. He I want to say he shared a prize with Brecht in 1961, which actually established his global reputation. And so by that time he would have been 61, 62. And so much of his short stories that we know him for, I think, like would have been first published in 1939 after he had a very serious illness that almost killed him. It was sepsis. He had somehow gotten infected. And also it was fairly recently after his father died. But he had an incredibly prolific writing in the 1940s into the 1950s. But the translation I have of Labyrinths that all of this is from were taken from works that were translated into English from 1957 to 1961. And in fact, I always forget that Borges actually lived in Austin, Texas, because he was a visiting professor, and he actually mentions Texas. I forgot to mention that earlier in one of the earlier readings from him. He actually was talking about the different places that constituted him. That might be too far, but to see Texas there, it made me smile, because Borges in Texas don't fit for me. There's something very, I don't know, North American about it, rather than his background. But and also by 1961, he would have already lived through the Perón dictatorship, where he was the head of the National Library, and then Perón promoted him to be the inspector of chickens, fowl, things like that, and he resigned. So my memory is that he when he started to go blind, it wasn't immediate blindness. He would see spots of yellow in his vision, and so there was a deterioration over time. So I'm trying to remember what year he would have been considered. He would have considered himself totally blind. So I'm sorry, maybe I got too specific. I was trying to answer your question, Alex. I hope I answered it.
Oh yeah, no, that's okay. I'm just trying to I don't know a whole lot about his history. I just know that it seems like he's one of these writers who is definitely more critically praised now than he was, at least during his time, especially because of the locale and where he came from. And so I guess the impact is more far-reaching, it seems, than what it was back, in the 30s and the 40s when he really started writing the bulk of it. But a lot of it for me is just, it seems like it is a little bit more self-reflective. And I'd be curious to know the timeline of when some of these parables were written versus when he started having a lot more tragedies in his life to kind of coincide.
Just to go on the kind of the Borges and I mean, I think there's kind of a paradox in it. The fact that he is recognizing the fact that he is separate from Borges, but at the same time says at the end, I do not know which of us has written this page. It's like there is this recognition that there is a separation between him and Borges, and that Borges is kind of, in a sense, taking away from him all these things that he once had. But I also see it as kind of Borges is the thing that allows him to continue moving forward. It's the thing that allows him to not get trapped in these ideas and not move on and find something else to imagine. I think from my perspective, and again, I'm creating a personality out of Borges. There's no way for me to know who he really was, but it's from my perspective that he sees a sort of value in this Borges, and the fact that he can distantiate himself from it, and that he can give these things away and move forward with them, and that on some level he doesn't have to be Borges. He can be himself and have Borges be this kind of thing fighting against him in some sense, and I can't help but feel like Borges likes in some sense this fight, the people being against him or loss or anything like that. I think he respects it in some sense because it's this sort of just force against his, that I think builds up his ability to write and to portray what he's trying to experience. I think he sees kind of loss and these things that might be upsetting or sad as things that give him meaning, that provide him with the opportunity to create things and to do what he has done, and so I think rather than see the audience or all these things happening that basically they change the art for him, once he creates these things, they're no longer his, in a sense, like the time and the readers and the people who read these things will change it indefinitely. But I think he's glad that that's the case on some level. It's sad in the sense that he can no longer own it, but in another sense, he can move forward, keep creating things, and keep building on this kind of idea that he wants to create. I think there's just a certain freedom in this kind of melancholy, sad theme that he's developing. And I think that Borges values that freedom more than he does some sort of happiness or comfort.
But couldn't you, in addition to what you said, Travis, couldn't you also see it as his realization that as long as people are talking about his short stories and parables, they're still invoking his name. They're still talking about him. So he'll still be alive in a sense. He will still exist in this world. So the Borges who created all this literature is permitting this other Borges who's going to die to, in some sense, not be dead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yeah, definitely. I think that's, yeah, and that's the kind of the two sides of it. It's like there's a certain freedom in death, but also, of course, you want to continue living in some level. And I think, in a sense, he gets both. He gets to both live on through Borges, but also still die and be human and ultimately be like a fully kind of relatable person.
Yeah, I think it's kind of one of the tensions here is basically, what Borges exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about this Borges is this kind of image of a persona of some kind of unified subject, but then here he seems to be making a distinction between basically a kind of, so I've been reading a little bit of kind of Lacan stuff, so I'll just get that out of the way, but basically there's like a subject that speaks, that talks with the I, and that's going to be kind of how he would fit into just our systems of language and our systems of meaning and whatnot. And I think here he's trying to capture exactly how this corresponds with the feeling of being I, of being here now, and that kind of concrete way of relating to things as if from a kind of center. And he talks about that in some other, there's a really early essay he did called The Nothingness of Personality, where he kind of gives a very Humean answer, but he talks about this notion of the self, and he says basically, I'm not denying that there's this kind of immediate feeling of being here, but he's denying that there's a kind of unified succession of a substantial thing called a personality or a self. And I think here he's talking from the point of view of something like that, of a kind of like this immediate relation. And there's the tension is with how exactly that is represented for other people, which also goes along with it with his self. So this would be more like the public persona, the mask of a uniform personality that everyone will recognize as a kind of as a something that represents who you are, and that you even use to represent yourself to yourself. Although I think everyone has the suspicion that it's kind of arbitrary and real bullshit, really. That it's a kind of front that people use so that people can attach some kind of distinct personality to people, a kind of way of thinking that there's real continuity there. And I think that's kind of the tension that he's kind of playing off of. And then I think it's very interesting that he's this very last line, I do not know which of us has written this page. And it's basically like, because if you are operating off of, to some degree, this image of your persona, or one way or another, whether you're thinking in terms like he is, like in the future, how will this be read and things like that. This will be read as Borges reading this, as we're thinking about it now, as Borges is writing this here, and he wrote it. And just I wonder if there's in a certain way like that kind of difference of the tenses of a present tense of Borges was writing this and Borges wrote that's kind of what he's getting at also, is the difference between those. But at the same time, I think he wants to complicate how those interact with each other, because I don't think he's going to say that there's some kind of clear-cut distinction, that in a way they're muddled. And that's why one of the reasons why your own identity is such a mystery to yourself, that nevertheless, it's so difficult, really impossible to know other people, especially if you consider knowledge to be, some kind of like perfect coincidence with something outside. And I think here it's even, the thing is that even self-knowledge is such a mystery that, what exactly are we saying when we talk about Borges? What is that, some kind of an image we have of someone who wrote this, or is he here in the works that we're reading? And all the ways that we try to, divine some kind of an intention behind what he's writing. Is that our image of Borges? Was he also kind of motivated by the same image of himself? And if so, who was that self that was motivated by this image of his self? There's so many different layers here of the self that it becomes just another kind of mirror reflecting another mirror, which is, that's the real image of Borges, I guess. There's not even really a person standing in the mirror. There's just mirrors reflecting the mirrors, and the nothingness of personality. And who exactly is writing this? Who exactly is reading this? I don't know. Maybe it's a language itself to some degree. Like I think you mentioned something about that. Yeah. Because what is good belongs to no one, not even to him, but rather to the language and to tradition.
Yeah, I think that points, that kind of brings to mind what I guess I see in this is not necessarily something good or bad. I don't think Borges would really consider his own writing in that way, but I see it like honesty. I see this real sense of authenticity that I could never confirm, because I don't know who Borges was, and who knows if he, this is just more of just some sort of public persona or whatnot. But I can't help but just sense this desire to express himself without any sort of conclusion or answer, and to be able to kind of provide these stories and to express oneself without kind of having some sort of conclusion or some sort of comfort, maybe, you know. I mean, there's very little provision of comfort, I think, in any of these parables, you know, and it's really kind of, in my personal understanding of it, kind of this exploration, you know, of his experience and his kind of the reason why he was doing the things that he's done, and what it means to him. And, you know, I just see, especially in this, you know, the fact that he sees these two kind of perspectives, you know, of himself and then Borges, and however much he wants to be able to differentiate those and understand them and separate them, he really can't, you know, and he recognizes them as existing. He recognizes them as being both kind of a part of him in some way, but, you know, even through all this, even through all of the stories he's created and everything he's done, I feel like he's kind of gotten no closer to really understanding what the point of it all was, you know. And I guess, you know, to someone that could be, I guess, sad, you know, in some sense, that he didn't maybe find something or didn't, you know, make some great statement. But to me, it's incredible, because I think it's arguing that you don't need to say something to create something, in a sense. You know, you don't have to say something new. You don't have to create a new novel idea to be able to still express yourself and create something beautiful, you know. And I think there's one short story, I can't remember exactly which one, that kind of talks about that specifically, but or knows the essay about novelty, you know, about history just being kind of the new intonation of the same idea over and over again. You know, from me, from my perspective, I think that that's really inspiring, you know, as someone who wants to be able to create things and wants to be able to express myself, but also has this sense of kind of perfectionism, or whatever you want to call, that kind of constantly tells myself that whatever I'm doing is never good enough, you know, and that there's always someone else doing it better. That's the sense I get, I guess, from these parables, you know, is that the fact that there was no point, or the fact that I can continue doing this and that there's no kind of conclusion or beautiful ending to this story. I've just kind of lost all these things that I gained. You know, I think that that's the beauty of it, you know, because that's what everyone does. They just kind of exist and create or express themselves until they die, you know, and Borges got to do that. And that's what's beautiful.
There's another theme that runs through a whole lot of these is dreaming. So, you know, in the first one, in Inferno, God speaks to what kind of big cat is it? A leopard through a dream, and he speaks to Dante in a dream. And then in Paradiso, the last sentence, who knows whether tonight we shall not see it in the labyrinths of our dreams. Maybe not so much in Ragnarok, but, you know, in the parable of Cervantes, he says,
I think Ragnarok is literally a dream.
What's that?
Ragnarok is literally.
Oh, it's literally a dream. Okay.
Right. In our dreams.
Right. In our dreams. Yeah. Thank you. And, you know, parable of Cervantes, he talks about the dreamer and the dreamed one. And anyway, it's a common theme throughout as well. And, you know, sort of reflecting on what Travis and Chase was saying, in, you know, it's, you know, dreams show up a lot in a lot of his short stories too. And then he's got this predilection for Schopenhauer's notion of the phenomenal world being the sort of the dream of this underlying will or something, so that all of this is a dream in some sense. And remember, I forgot what the name of the story was, but where the guy crawls out of the jungle and he dreams up the boy, and then he turns out he's a dream. And so
The circular ruins?
Yeah, the circular ruins. Yeah. So it seems like, kind of like going along with it, Travis and Chase were saying, there's sort of this radical decentering of the self and the ego. And, what would be the meaning of my life, and how would I experience my life differently if I sort of, I don't know what to say, meditated or considered the possibility that this is some sort of dream. I mean, you wouldn't have to say it. It wouldn't have to be, you could think of it literally as a dream and use that as sort of a mythical way in, or you could think of it in terms of, what Chase was saying about there is no permanent personality, but you have just these shifting and changing psychological forms that have a sort of coherence for a period of time and then don't. And then, if my being, and in some sense the being of the phenomenal world, is a kind of dream, then anything I create is the creation of a dream. So it's the dreamer dreaming. And in that sense, then everything becomes radically ephemeral, because the things that I produce and create are, again, just dreams that have been produced by a dreamer. And it all becomes kind of smoke and mirrors and ephemeral. And, maybe as Travis was saying, maybe there's a deep kind of beauty in that, in a way. I'm reminded of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition of making I think they're mandalas out of sand. They did one at the museum here a number of years ago, but they spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours making these intricate, beautiful mandalas out of colored sand. And then when they're done, they just wipe it out. And, as a sort of testimony to the impermanence of all things. And there is, I don't know, in a sense that sort of heightens the beauty of things because they are temporary and fragmentary and broken apart. And so, but it is sort of a melancholy beauty, but like Travis was saying, sort of beautiful nonetheless. And the last, I guess, parable in this thing is this elegy it's 251 in this one, but it's the very last thing. And, he lists all these things that he's experienced. I've had this experience and that experience. And then toward the end, he says, to have seen the things that men see, death, the sluggish dawn, the plains, the delicate stars, to have seen nothing or almost nothing, except the face of a girl from Buenos Aires, a face that does not want you to remember it. O destiny of Borges, perhaps no stranger than your own. I mean, that, the poignancy and the beauty of those last lines are heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. And so again, I kind of with Travis on that. That's why, I posted this scene from Blade Runner, which is probably one of my very favorite movies. And the very last scene, you have this, it's not exactly the last scene, but close to the last scene, this replicant who is it's not really synthetic. They're human beings. They're real physical humans, but they've been manufactured. And this guy whose life only lasts, I think it's 3 years, he's trying to figure out how to survive longer. And the answer, you can't, because your biology was developed in such a way that you automatically die after 3 years, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. And the last scene, there's this Blade Runner who's been chasing him, trying to kill him, and they confront one another at the end, and Roy, the replicant, just sets him off, leaves him sitting there, and it's, in the rain, and he gives this monologue where he says, you wouldn't believe the things I've seen. I've seen these ships on fire off off some constellation or planet. I've seen this, I've seen these beautiful things. yeah, Tears in the Rain. And then he just bows his head and dies. And it looks to me, it has the same emotional impact for me as this last elegy for Borges, when I've lived this. I mean, that scene is a parable of human life. I think, you know, you do these things and it's just a dreamer dreaming. And at the end of the dream, you know, the smoke kind of, it's like you've got these figures made of smoke and they just kind of break apart in the breeze, and that's the end of it. So
Yeah.
this sad boy happiness.
But then if you try to reach for the smoke in the air, that's what clears it out. Where if you just simply admire it as smoke, just there, that's where you can really see the beauty rather than trying to capture it. So first of all, I'd say that the book "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep" is way better than Blade Runner. I just had to say that.
Just have to say that.
Yeah. I mean, Blade Runner is good for what it is, you know, but yeah, the book's better. So, yeah, there's actually one part of the book where an android is trying to basically convince one of the bounty hunter to kill her, and is just saying like, yeah, it's just a mechanism, whatever. And it's just basically going through like the process of like how she would die and trying to like convince him that it would basically be of no consequence. And you can see there's a kind of irony there, because basically by her even describing that and being aware of this, that it kind of like negates itself, that it's just this mechanism necessarily. And yeah, there's a lot of really interesting stuff in that book that goes into this kind of stuff. And the part that they don't have so much in Blade Runner is there's this religion called Mercerism, where people can go and basically participate in this kind of like myth of Sisyphus type thing, where they have this kind of mystical union with this old guy climbing up a mountain who's pelted by rocks, and they feel this empathetic participation with every other person that is currently participating in it. And that's the thing that the androids are not capable of doing. And it's really interesting kind of reflection on, you know, what the human is in terms of empathy, when a lot of these humans are then going around and actually killing basically these androids that look exactly like humans and in a lot of ways act like humans. And it makes you wonder exactly about where does the human, you know, begin in terms of all these different ways that we see our identity and other things, such as like how we treat animals or whatever. I'm getting way off track. Okay, so basically what I wanted to say is really about dreams. And so I see a lot of this. I think Nietzsche's ideas about the Dionysian and the Apollonian are really helpful. And so basically he's saying that so he associates the Apollonian with the dream world, that's the world of images and illusion and beauty and forms and appearances in the Schopenhauerian Kantian kind of sense. And he sees that as basically that nature actually has a creative function of basically like weaving these illusions and appearances. And that's actually what makes life beautiful in a sense. And it's basically like this will to kind of like escape from this. So there's this kind of like the world of nature as something that's antagonistic, that's just this flux of violence and cruelty and all this stuff, and basically in recognizing that, like, that there's also this aspect of nature that seeks to kind of escape from that by creating these illusions such as identity and individuality and all these forms, that there's something kind of beautiful about that is a part of this dream function. And I think that's an interesting way to kind of see this notion of, you know, the gods in the dream and whatnot, that, you know, they're a part of this kind of aspect that we give to being able to give an appearance to things, to give some kind of a recognition to individual ideas and whatnot. But then it's interesting because what they actually represent, though, is exactly what Nietzsche says is covered over by dreams. Because we try to, you know, I think especially is true in a lot of the ways most people would see religion now, is basically, it's, you know, trying to affirm what you like most, what is most positive about these things, these good images. But in here, he's saying that it's the exact opposite. It's basically like these unconscious forces that we try to cover over. This is kind of like the Dionysian aspect that is disintegrative and whatnot. And I think there's also a similar thing going on in terms of, you know, how he talks about the self and personality and whatnot, that in one sense there's this kind of flux, this thing that is always kind of escaping itself, and at the same time there corresponds this kind of image that corresponds with that is a way of kind of giving solace or some kind of a form of beauty in which we can represent what really can't be represented, which is that flux and that very ephemeral aspect of life itself. And I think he also captures this in all the ways that he brings dreams into play. It's this way of kind of showing that, first of all, one thing that we see as, you know, determinately real could just be an appearance of something. That it could be a part of something else that basically makes that process actually be dwarfed in importance and whatnot. So I think in the parable of Problem, where he's talking about, you know, Don Quixote kills someone, and basically these different interpretations of that. And then the very last one, where he's basically talking about Hinduism, and I think specifically he seems to be somewhat mentioning the Bhagavad Gita, where essentially there's this prince who has to wage war on his relatives and come to terms with that. And that's what the Bhagavad Gita is about a dialogue with Vishnu, in which he says basically, you know, you have to do the things you have to do. But ultimately there's this level of these things of this world that are illusory. And I see that here basically where he's talking about, you know, this idea of the dead body of the enemy killing and engendering our divine or magical acts, which notably transcend the human condition. He knows that the dead man is illusory, the same as the bloody sword weighing in his hand and himself and all his past life and the vast gods in the universe. I wonder if there's something like a comparison you can also make in terms of what he's talking about with Borges and I, in the sense that there's recognition of a kind of appearance of these different things, of these events, like someone being killed, which presupposes an individuality there that no longer is. And there's all these ephemeral events going on. And then there's a kind of recognition also of those as something that's an appearance of them, but that doesn't really capture them, or it's almost like a dual-sided thing where, yes, you have these individual acts, these individual people and identities and all these things. But then the dream is a kind of way of shifting that so that they take on a new signification where it's suddenly not as real as it was before, and it's instead a kind of partial reality, like an appearance, I guess. And I think he's doing something similar when he talks about himself, where he's saying, this idea of all these events flowing and whatnot through my life and all these things I've created, and that this is something also that if we try to put some kind of a determinate identity on it, an image, that itself is that is also part of the dream function of basically supplying things with images and forms and whatnot. And yet that's also part of these, impulses of nature and of life that ultimately justify the world in a aesthetic sense. Yeah, I think I've ranted long enough.
Well, but if go back to the one, I think you said, Chase, Everything and Nothing. No, he mentions Macbeth. No, the one where you say he invokes does he say Hindustan? Oh, a problem. Look at the last sentence. He knows that the dead man is illusory, the same as the bloody sword weighing his hand in himself and all his past life and the vast gods in the universe. Well, why is it illusory if he's referring to his past life? If he's saying that there is something, this last conjecture, which is alien to the Spanish orb and even to the orb of the Western world, and requires a more ancient, more complex, and more dreary atmosphere, he's not Don Quixote, but a king of the cycles of Hindustan. This is the essay where I got the sense of Borges being the most, for lack of a better term, non-Western in his sensibility. And if the idea of the Hindus and I apologize, I don't want to get the wording incorrect, but the recurrence, the eternal recurrence, then it seems to me each manifestation of a soul or of an individual is equally valid in each manifestation, and none is more or less real than the other. So I just thought it was odd that he would say it's illusionary, that the individual personality or the individual actor is illusionary, but he's putting it in a cosmic whole, which he seems to be accepting as being true, as being somehow, maybe that's why people have a sense of, am I living in a dream, or this seems familiar, or at the very, very low level, deja vu, because there is some kind of, is there a cosmic memory, or are there a certain number of forms beyond which we don't go, and so there's a reconfiguration of them and a rearticulation of them.
So I think maybe one way you can kind of see that is in Buddhist philosophy, Nagarjuna, who is kind of like a medieval Buddhist philosopher, he came with this idea. So one of the sort of central ideas of Mahayana Buddhism is this notion of emptiness, which corresponds to their idea of, non-self, that there's no abiding permanent self.
Right.
And it's this notion that basically that's extended to everything, that there's nothing that has any kind of self-enclosed abiding identity, and that is what they mean by emptiness, that it's emptiness of a permanent self, and that everything has this condition of emptiness.
But
And
I thought you invoked Hinduism when you referenced the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
And isn't that a separate? I mean, it's been a while since I've read the Bhagavad Gita, but it struck me as an earlier version of Greco-Roman Stoicism. You know, the world's really shitty. People are going to betray you. Don't bitch about it. You know, this is the world that you're faced with. It's contingent, a lot of shitty people. You're going to go through it. But the test of a person is their self-reliance, their bravery, their willingness, the stick-to-itness. You know, don't complain, do the job at hand, do the best you can, realize it's not anywhere close to being perfect, and the universe is just very, very large, and each one of us is small. But that I don't know, just the Bhagavad Gita has a completely different sensibility than so much of Buddhism.
So I think with the Bhagavad Gita, the kind of the similarity there is he's saying that, you know, you have to do these acts, but ultimately they're not the most primordial substrate of reality, that these are kind of finite temporal activities, and really seen from the, you know, the big picture, I guess, of eternity and whatnot, that these are just kind of plays of the Godhead. And essentially, so what I see, like, the real core of Hinduism is that, you know, the world is kind of like the play, like a stage play of this one Godhead who loses himself in these separate identities, only to like find himself. So it's a kind of like a cosmic hide and seek, where, you know, it's kind of like, okay, you're God, you can create everything and do everything. It's kind of like you start to dream your own dream, like you control it and do everything, and eventually you decide as an adventurer to just kind of lose yourself in these identities, only so you could rediscover yourself. And that's just part of the play of existence, of a mind that just dreams itself and creates by dreaming. And I see something like that here, where, you know, there's this one level of the dream and the drama of the dream, and being totally caught up in these characters of Don Quixote and Arjuna and all these things. And then there's this recognition that, oh, there's this other level of the same reality, almost like another perspective of it, but in a sense, kind of, I guess we'd say a way of seeing it, where from the perspective, though, of the Godhead, these are just simply different forms kind of transforming into each other. And one isn't necessarily going to be something totally real of itself, just sitting there outside of how it functions in the play of all these ephemeral forms. And I think you could see Buddhism a lot. I mean, there's definitely differences with Hinduism and whatnot. Even among Buddhism, there's a lot of differences with the different philosophies and whatnot. But I think there is something of a continuity there, in the sense that in Hinduism and whatnot, this idea of kind of that, you know, there's some kind of an illusion that we have to break through, that is affirmed in both cases, in the sense that, so the two truths doctrine is basically saying that you can talk about, you know, yourself and all these things as, you know, the way that normal speech would talk about. You know, there's the ordinary empirical world and our way of speaking about it, but then there's this world that is more real than that you can't necessarily speak about in the ordinary way that language speaks about them. And that's the world of emptiness. That's the world where there are no permanent identities, that Borges is just kind of a symbol slap onto something that is empty, that is changing, in the same way that this dead person and all these acts and all these things, that there's something that goes beyond all these ways that we try to symbolize them and whatnot. So I think there's something of a continuity there. And I think that's what Borges likes about this idea, and why he compares it to all these things, is he's trying to kind of like pull the rug out from under these things, in terms of saying that, you know, the reality that we think we associate with them can always be shifted. We can always have like some other kind of vantage point on these things. And, you know, I think it's significant that he presents three different scenarios here, to show that, you know, he's not exactly dogmatically saying that, you know, life is an illusion in this sense, but that this is one interpretation of many. You know, I think that's, and, you know, one of them could be, you know, this idea of like delirium or madness or whatnot. But usually they all are kind of different forms of dreams. So you could see it as almost like a way of thinking of, once again, like, what exactly are dreams? What is going on? You know, this may be a hallucinatory world, and recognizing that may mean, you know, you're permanently trapped in your own kind of madness, or it could be, you know, some kind of ultimate liberation and realization of cosmic reality in some sense. So I think that that sort of uncertainty is kind of key here. And I think that's what he really likes about a lot of these kind of Eastern religious point of views also.
I was going to read, this is I just found this online. It's the Britannica definition of Brahman. Brahman in the Upanishads, the supreme existence or the absolute reality, through a variety of views, are expressed in the Upanishads. They concur in the definition of Brahman as eternal, conscious, irreducible, infinite, omnipresent, and the spiritual core of the universe of finiteness and change. So like Chase was saying, Brahman is kind of this universal, eternal consciousness. And one way I've heard it described is each individual consciousness is like a drop of water, and then you have the ocean of being, which is Brahman. And when you die, that drop of water falls back into the ocean. And so then, you know, this phenomenal world is the dream of Brahman in a way. And so, you know, like one of the common features in some Eastern religions, which I think Chase has also mentioned, is that the reason we suffer is because of individuation. You know, because who is it that suffers? Well, it's me that suffers. And so that to the degree that I lose a strong identification or individual self, then suffering begins to lose hold on me as well. And so, you know, I think, you know, again, like Chase is saying, he's seems to be making reference to that, which is also consistent with this thing about his liking of Schopenhauer, and thinking that the ultimate whatever substrate, which is a bad word, is this cosmic will. And then again, this world is sort of the phenomenal dream of that, which also involves the dream of individuation. So, yep, I think, and I don't know, I was kind of let myself slip into one of these, I don't know what, more of a literary / meditative state when I was thinking about this, you know, this dream stuff and all that. And it does kind of have, it seems like that has the potential to kind of shift my feeling of what it means to be here now, you know, to use that sort of term. But so, you know, I think, I wonder if some of these these things that he's saying here is they're not merely intellectual exercises, but they're sort of meditations on his creative life and the way he experiences himself and the relation between those two. And then, like Travis said, the sort of comfort that can come from that shifting of that perspective, even I don't want to say in spite of, but even within the midst of all that temporary flux. Okay.
Yeah, and I think one other thing is so in Everything and Nothing, where he's talking about Shakespeare. Shakespeare sounds a lot like the Hindu idea of God as this kind of cosmic dreamer. And then, after, at the very end there, so he's saying, after dying, he found himself in the presence of God and told him, I, who have been so many men in vain, want to be one and myself. The voice of the Lord answered from a whirlwind, neither am I anyone. I have dreamt the world as you dreamt your works, my Shakespeare. And among the forms in my dreams are you, who like myself are many and no one. Yeah. So I think that kind of says it himself. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder. And there's a strong parallel, which I'm sure the editor intended it this way, between Borges and I, and Everything and Nothing. In Borges, Borges and I, it's Borges who finds this sort of emptiness at his core, and then Shakespeare, his whole life is a search to cover up this void with characters. And oh God, what was I going to say? But so maybe at the core, we are all that void. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. So maybe, the first time I read this, I think of Shakespeare in this as a pathological case. Like, oh my God, what a sick mind. But maybe what he's, maybe his portrayal anyway here of Shakespeare is a guy who actually was more clearly in touch with what was at the core, which was this sort of void. And he had maybe a more visceral experience of that on a continuing basis than most of us do. Most of us are able to sustain the illusion of substantial individuality. And maybe his portrayal of Shakespeare wasn't able to do that.
That's definitely interesting. I like how, it's kind of, Shakespeare recognizes this kind of like fundamental emptiness at the core of himself, and he seems to be unusual because of that. These people are like, what are you talking about? You're not anyone. What are you talking about, Shakespeare? And he says, he would get a kind of sense of himself in pretending to be people. And I think that's pretty interesting. And then, after he was done acting, the hated flavor of unreality returned to him. I think that's that's interesting that he's basically kind of like suffering with this, and he's only kind of really happy actually playing within the illusion of, acting, of going outside of this is just nothingness and actually taking on these forms, and these forms are illusions. I think that's kind of the idea of God also that he has, that, God also is what plays in these illusions and enjoys it and finds, that's where the creativity actually is there. And, despite him he's essentially neurotic, but he's neurotic in a way that mirrors also God's own kind of neuroticism, but it's not that it's really neurotic in like a conventional way of thinking of it. But it's basically like the God himself is schizophrenic, or itself is schizophrenic, and takes on all these different forms and in getting lost outside of itself, it comes to express itself and its creative function, which is, that's what it's all about, really, is this creative function that creates these illusory forms. And I think that's kind of like what Borges is doing in all of his works, is he's delighting in creating these illusions and creating these strange mirrors of reality and fiction and whatnot. And I think there's something where he's going to see that there's also a kind of strange mirror of, you know, maybe reality itself, and this idea that, you know, reality itself is kind of something that is always kind of in a kind of ecstatic position towards itself, and that it's always going outside of itself and playing that it's something else, in the same way that nature has these impulses to create appearances and whatnot. I think there's a lot of ways you can kind of sort of create a dialogue, I guess, between all those different levels. And it's definitely something in here about Borges' understanding about his own fiction and his own kind of role or image of himself as someone who creates things, is also very much involved in the way that he talks about a lot of this philosophy and religious kind of stuff too.
I'll try not to belabor this longer, but sorry. But yeah, one thing I love about that passage that Chase read is, it's like, you know, Shakespeare feels this terrible emptiness. And so when he comes before God, he wants to find something solid and stable finally to stand on. And God's like, no, it's emptiness all the way down. You know, because he says, among the forms in my dreams are you, who like myself are many and no one. And so it's like, it's just empty all the way down. There's nothing but that emptiness. And yet somehow out of that void, like Chase was saying, that somehow that void is exactly the source of this creativity that somehow, you know, fountains up out of that nothingness. It's this weird void of absolute productivity.
In a sense, I think is stable. You know, I mean, if it's the thing that you're holding on to that's giving you meaning, then there's no reason to believe it's any less stable than the belief that there's something real. So.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like the process of creating the illusion is what is the reality. And in that sense, that's kind of the metaphysical principle there of the creation is itself a kind of stability of form in a way. So even if, you know, it's like the old paradox of the only constant is change or whatnot, it's something kind of like that. But I think it's, yeah, not just change, but here it's really about creation in a way, and knowingly creating these illusions and whatnot.
That was a very nice way to finish Borges, at least for me. So any last comments before we tearfully end Borges?
Who is Borges anyways?
I don't even know who I am, so.
Yeah.
I mean, when we have sort of with Borges on this, I actually have this sense sometimes, like, I don't know, I think I have some similar experiences that sort of generate this. I'm like, I just don't feel like there's anyone here sometimes, you know, and I feel like every time I talk to anybody, I'm generating some facade, and underneath there's really just not anything there. So.
Yeah, I feel the same way too. But it's kind of fun. Like, you can just like create your own like ridiculous personalities and stuff.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a sort of freedom in it. You know, if you You know, I think, yeah, a lot of my life, I think I kind of, like, it's the same thing as like reaching the logical conclusion of pessimism and then seeing like a sort of optimism in it. It's like, you know, if I'm nothing, then I can be anything, and that's great. You know, I mean, that's incredible. You know, and I'm not attaching myself to some sort of personality. I can really, you know, find some sort of balance between what I want and what other people want, and then just create a sense of myself within that. You know, which is much less definite, I think, or, you know, easily conveyed. But I'm trying to be, you know, comfortable with that. You know, and kind of simultaneously see myself as something and nothing. You know, because I identify with being both at different times.
You know, there's a documentary about when Jim Carrey played Andy Kaufman in The Man on the Moon, where he was kind of like method acting to the point where he was almost like possessed by Andy Kaufman and would just like constantly act like him, even, you know, off camera. And it basically sounded almost like psychosis, like he was like completely lost in the character. And when he finally came out of it, he was just like, oh, okay, who exactly am I now? And yeah, it's interesting to hear what he has to say, and how it's basically like this kind of realization that was born out of that process of acting, that, you know, if I can take up all these different people, who exactly am I then? You know, it's actually a creative function, you know, pretending to be someone, because yeah, that's what we're all doing.
Okay. Are we done?
So I guess now, in just
Shut up, Chase.
in banishing Borges, he's gonna just continue to live on in everything else we read.
Well, sure.
That's my,
just like Kafka.
yeah. I think we'll see him in Schelling.
Is he going to be more or less referenced than Deleuze? That's the question.
Well, if Hunter rejoins us, we will definitely find Hegel in Kafka and so. Okay, well, hopefully we'll see you guys on Friday, and we'll keep in communication about, you know what I'll probably do is send you guys a draft of what I'm planning on sending out, so then you guys can make comments on it if you want. So, okay, well, thank you very much. It's been wonderful. I am so grateful that people are willing to do this. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Been fun, guys.